Forget all you know about podcasts. We welcome you to an experience uniquely different. Please join us for our coverage of all entertainment on the fringe of society. The candles are lit, the lights are down low. It is now time to welcome our host as he steps up to the pulpit. The sacrifice has been prepared for the midnight Black Mass.
Ghastly greetings, groovy ghoulies, and welcome to another edition of the Midnight Black Mass. It is I, your host, the devil you know, the maniacal minister of the occult, the Rev Dan Wilson, here with another edition of the program. I am sick as a fucking dog. It finally caught up to me. I had tried to avoid the winter bugs and various viruses and other things that are going around, and I did a pretty good job. I made it all the way to December, and that usually starts for me in late September, so it was a win. But right here at the 1st of December now, I'm getting a little sick, so that's one of many reasons. We also had the Thanksgiving holiday. Hope everybody's was nice. Mine was awesome. Just a lot of little busy family stuff, so I didn't really have time to schedule interviews. Everybody was spending time with their families. But next week on the show, going to have a brand new interview for you. Going to have former WCW, Wildside, and Nashville star Air Paris. He's no longer in the game of professional wrestling. We're going to look at it from a different perspective. We're going to talk about his career. We're going to talk about life outside the wrestling business and life after wrestling. And he's proof that you can be happy once this is all said and done. He's got a good life. He's got a steady job. He's got a good family. And, that's guys really need to think of some sort of an exit strategy, honestly. I mean, this business is not going to be around forever. I'll probably be out there until they just stop booking me or throw me out. But, these years are not forever, and it really is helpful and healthy for some people to be able to let it go at some point and move on with their lives. I hope to be able to do that at some point too. But as I said, I'll probably end up sticking around for better or for worse until they throw me out. But looking forward to having Paris on the show. Also going to have Pat Rose up in a couple of weeks. Great Southeastern legend. Going to be a lot of fun to have him. Couple of quick items to discuss this week. The Revs rant. I could go ahead and get into that a little bit. But before I do want to talk about the Styles Clash controversy. This is a good forum for that. I talked about it a little bit on Twitter, but, I don't like going into such detail where just everyone can see it clearly. If you've sought out this podcast, then you kind of know what's up. So I try to talk to you man to man, mano y mano, even though the veil has been pulled back to the world, I still try to protect things where I can. But here on this show, we've kind of given that open forum and thrown that rule out the window. So that's what we'll continue to do here. Recent controversy, former guest of the show, good friend of mine, AJ Styles, broke the neck of Yoshitatsu in Japan on a botched Styles Clash. And there's been a giant uproar from a lot of the internet wrestling community that, and even not even just the internet, even guys in the business, stating that maybe AJ should give up the move. Well, first of all, I've been in the room several times when the match is being put together with AJ. Of course, I've seen him deny many requests from guys for that reason. He didn't think it was going to be safe. He didn't think it was going to be something that the guy was going to be able to do without getting hurt, so he didn't try it. There's a level of risk to anything that you do in the ring, and for all the people that say AJ should stop using the move because the opponents don't know how to take it. Well, there's a lady, and she's actually married to The Undertaker now. Her name was Michelle McCool, and she wrestled in the WWE, and she borrowed that move, for lack of a better word. But my point is, the female wrestlers in the WWE, especially during the time that this was happening, now they've certainly don't quite have that reputation so much, but at the time, it was pretty well known in the industry that if you were a WWE diva, unless you were one of the select few who was very good at what they did, you were fucking garbage in the ring. You were hired because you looked good and people fucking wanted to pay to see you get half naked and stand there. You couldn't wrestle worth a shit. You're the drizzling fucking shits. Fucking Kelly took the Styles Clash many times and was never hurt. Matter of fact, none of the divas were seriously injured taking that move. So it begs my question, all the motherfuckers out here talking shit. If you are not comfortable taking the move, then you're not as good as Kelly. So you just might as well accept it and quit the fucking business. That's the logical analogy that I make when comparing that. AJ has never asked anyone to take the move they didn't want to. He goes over in great detail how to not break your neck while taking it. A lot of guys say it's instinct. Sure. But again, if they didn't think that they could take it safely, he gave them the out. It's always unfortunate when someone gets hurt. And all the joking aside, it really sucks. I mean, it is a business of showbiz and entertainment. You're out there to protect your opponent and make it look like you killed him and make the people believe you killed him and not actually do that to where he can't go home and feed his family, especially when there's so few opportunities for guys to do that now. So it really sucks that guys got hurt. Don't get me wrong, but we're talking about 2 major injuries in a 15-year career. A couple of guys have had close calls, but the facts are only 2 major injuries in his entire career. So I think, once again, people who think they know wrestling don't really know as much as they think they fucking do. That goes for the boys included, which leads me to the Revs rant this week. Just my analysis of independent wrestling lately. You motherfuckers don't have a goddamn clue what you're doing. And I'm not talking about everybody. That's an awful blanket statement, I know. But fuck me. Learn your goddamn fundamentals. Like we talked about this. I understand that you don't come from a background where that was instilled in you. Your trainers probably did a bad job because most of you don't know how to conduct business either. But there are actually rules on how to conduct yourself in the wrestling business. There are actually rules on how to conduct yourself in a locker room with promoters, with the boys in the ring, why stories are told, why they make sense. And everybody is such a fucking mark for themselves. Nobody understands the whole of the big picture. Which is you're telling stories, and stories don't get told overnight, especially when you're doing an episodic type of event where things unfold over a great period of time. People get so frustrated and pissed off because they don't understand. And you look at the thing with the CM Punk interview, certainly a giant indictment on the WWE wellness program. And here's the difference between all of you wannabe motherfuckers and CM Punk. CM Punk drew millions of dollars in revenue for a global company. So before you all start copying CM Punk because he stuck it to the man and stood up to him and told him that he wasn't going to do what they wanted to do, that doesn't mean that you're qualified to follow in those footsteps because he had proven himself as a draw. Say what you want about him. He had proven himself as a commodity, a legitimate commodity. Most of you assholes are just superstars in your own fucking mind, and nobody would pay a goddamn buffalo nickel or a fucking hay penny to see you wrestle. So until they will, you ain't shit, and you ain't never gonna be shit. So take that to the fucking bank. I can promise you I'm preaching the new American gospel this week on the Revs rant. And I could go about that motherfucker all night long. Just irritates me. Did Empire Chasing the Grail 2014? It was a fantastic event, top to bottom. I'm also a little sore in the throat area from doing the Joey Styles, pulling the commentary all by myself all night long. That's a tough job, man. I got a lot of respect for old Joey for having to do that on major things like pay-per-view broadcasts. I mean, fuck, it's not like this is my first time at the rodeo. I've done it several dozen times. As a matter of fact, I did a fucking 6-hour show a few months ago where I was one of 3 commentators, but still for 6 fucking hours. Fuck me, you know? And so that's kind of what I've been up to. But man, what a stellar card from top to bottom. Indie wrestling as it should be. That's why I'm so proud to be a part of the Empire family, because I don't need this shit. You know what I'm saying? I did 15 years. I've been on television. I've met all my heroes. I've worked with most of them. I've got the respect of a good bit of them. I don't need anything else. Unless someone wants to drive a bucket or a fucking truckload of money up to my house, I don't need professional wrestling other than to satisfy my own creative urges. And so at Empire, they run it like a professional operation. It looks professional. The booker is a professional. Though here lately, I hear that some of the boys, not the regulars, I don't think, or even the mainstays, but there are people allegedly that have been there that don't care for Mr. Alexander's candor. And I got one fucking statement for them, is that you would have never last 2 fucking seconds when wrestling was actually good and would have fucking paid your goddamn bills, because you're fucking pussies. You know, you're all fucking pussies. If you bitch and whine because somebody critiqued your fucking match and told you what you needed to do to better yourself, then you are the fucking mark. You are the fucking mark because you got mad about it. If someone, even a fucking, I'm talking about an internet reporter even, okay, they're not a mentor or a veteran. You think, well, I probably couldn't learn anything from them. Hey, even an internet reporter tears their shit apart. It may be worth examining what they said instead of just making excuses and blowing them off. I mean, I certainly don't have credentials to speak on it, but I'd say somebody like a Larry Goodman, who is very well respected all throughout the industry by the boys and the fucking fans, I think that bottom line is there's always something you can learn. I know a fucking shitload about wrestling. I know more about fucking wrestling than 3/4 of people wrestling on the independent scene, especially the ones that haven't had a contract or done more than me. So, and you know what? All of that I know, there's still fucking 10 times that I don't fucking know. 10 times or more. The game never stops. You're always learning, and you stupid fucks don't want to learn. And if you don't want to fucking learn, do me a favor and just get the fuck out. Because you're just wasting your time, or go to one of these little shit shows that doesn't have nothing fucking going for it, and that just is going to pay you money to come in there and play and be a fucking mark for yourself, because that's all you want to do. That's the only reason you got into this business. You didn't get into it because you loved wrestling. You got into it because you love your fucking self, and that's it. And you just piss me off. You make my fucking ass red. I promise you. So, in any event, that was just a long, disjointed rambling, but speaking about Empire just makes me proud to work for a place that takes professional wrestling seriously. And if you don't understand why that's important, then fuck you. You're just taking up space, and you don't get the fucking big picture, and you're never gonna get a job in the fucking big leagues, because they certainly aren't gonna fucking tolerate that shit. So, always on the Revs rant, food for thought. Spin that around in your little acorn for a little while and see if you can understand what that all means. Okay, going to commercial break right now, but we'll be right back. We're going to have a classic throwback episode here to the very first edition of the Wild Side Chronicles. We've heard in the news that Anarchy Wrestling may be closing down at the end of the year. The NCW-NWA arena that has housed so much great wrestling since 1998 may be done for good. And as many know, I spent a lot of my time there as a commentator. spent a lot of my time there as a manager. It is my home. It is where I made my name in professional wrestling and was afforded to go out and do other things and get other bookings and be seen and known in other parts of the country and the world. So I owe a great deal of gratitude to all the fans there, and I promise you I will come say goodbye before it's all said and done, if it indeed is the final goodbye. So in spirit and tribute of all of that, I don't know if you follow Bill Behrens on Facebook, go at him. Hell, he'll fucking add anybody based on the way I've seen it. So go friend him on Facebook. Follow him on Twitter. He's been sharing a lot of Wildside nostalgia lately. He's dipped in to the old photo album and has located a great deal of classic Wildside nostalgia. And he is going to be just continuing to put that out there until he's all done with it. So in honor of that, we're going to have the classic interview, the first ever edition of the Wildside Chronicles, one of the first episodes we ever did with the one and only Bill Behrens, coming up right after the break. Don't go anywhere.
The Midnight Black Mass is pleased to announce we have become an affiliate of the World Wrestling Network at WWNLive.com, the home of the finest iPay-per-view and video on demand in all of professional wrestling, featuring promotions like Dragon Gate USA, Evolve, Combat Zone Wrestling, OVW, Shimmer, Shine, $5 Wrestling, and the vaunted Kayfabe commentaries with their U-Shoot, their guest booker, and their timeline series. You have to check it out. Of course, you can always go to their main page at WWNLive.com, but if you will, do us a solid, go to Facebook.com/PottyHumor or follow me on Twitter at Dragons Rejects. We'll be posting our own unique links to these events as affiliates. If you go through our link, they give us a little kickback, and we greatly...
An autograph session, personal appearance, or live event, we got just the person you need to contact for all of those needs. SBI Bookings is home of some of the best stars in the wrestling industry today. They provide you with the best talent this business has to offer, from Kevin Nash, Larry Zbyszko, Scott Steiner, and many, many more. So who will you contact next time you're planning an event? The men of SBI Bookings. Check them out at sbibookings.com.
Wrestling fans, Anarchy Wrestling television tapings are the second and fourth Saturdays of every month at 4236 Level Grove Road in Cornelia, Georgia. For more information on Anarchy Wrestling and on the shows, to watch the television product, and a whole lot more, go to anarchy-wrestling.net. That's Anarchy Wrestling, the second and fourth Saturdays of every month in Cornelia, Georgia.
Where can you find 24/7 pro wrestling, MMA, talk radio, and more? BeyondRingside.com, featuring 24/7 streaming audio, including the Midnight Black Mass, Sundays at 11 p.m. Eastern Time, except for pay-per-view weekends when they run a mini marathon and the Midnight Black Mass goes on as its namesake at midnight. But don't forget the other great shows like Beyond Ringside, Wrestle Rage, To Be Determined, and more. That's BeyondRingside.com. Hey kids, get your official Midnight Black Mass merchandise just in time for Halloween at midnightblackmass.spreadshirt.com. Be the coolest ghoul on the block with your brand new Reject or Midnight Black Mass t-shirt. Get them exclusively online. Online exclusive, people. midnightblackmass.spreadshirt.com.
And we're back here on the Midnight Black Mass. Thank you for joining us. And now it is time to debut a very special segment here on the show that we're going to be moving forward with, hopefully on a weekly basis, if not a very regular basis. And this is part one, and we only got 30 minutes, so I'm assuming we're probably not even going to get a fraction of the story here. But hopefully we'll be able to bring this guest back for future episodes. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the show the professional wrestling agent to the stars, the founder of the Feast of NWA Wildside, and a longtime dear friend of mine, Mr. Bill Behrens. It is our honor to have you here on the Midnight Black Mass.
Well, thank you so much. And this is, I have to admit, my first Black Mass.
Yes, it is. And we've been doing the program here in one way or the other for about a year, and glad to finally get you on in perfect timing for the NWA Wildside Chronicles. No better guest, I think, to go first in all this. So while we're moving along, why don't we go ahead? Why don't you give us first just the Bill Behrens origin story? If this were a comic book hero legend of a man that built an indie wrestling empire, so to speak, what would the secret origin of Bill Behrens be?
Well, the wrestling nutshell version, I started in TV as a television salesperson with a lot of companies like Universal Television and others, and periodically had contact with wrestlers in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s. I was helping wrestling companies get on TV, initially on what was called the Prime Sports Network, which eventually became Fox Sports years later, but it was at that time a group of regional sports channels, and they just needed programming. So I was calling Florida Championship Wrestling and Don Owen and all these other people, and Dave Woods, who owned Continental Wrestling or had bought it from the Fullers, and I was getting these on TV, but I really wasn't in the business. 1993, I wrote a letter to the Torch about a really stupid TV taping that was done in high definition in Texas with Jim Crockett, who had just gotten out of his no-compete. And it was just stupid because only now are we only staggering into high def and only getting out of it what we are. And, this is 1993. Not even the Japanese were up to speed at that point. And here's this guy taping in high def like it's going to go anywhere. And, of course, it didn't, but a lot of people got paid, and bless their hearts for that. And that's sort of what I wrote. And Jerry Jarrett contacted me and said, hey, you seem to know TV and you understand wrestling, and I don't know many people like that. So would you help me find towns for USWA for my son, Jeff Jarrett, to be a promoter? We entered into an arrangement, and I did that. And I was going to be paid for that based on the markets I cleared, because Jeff would then go out and promote them, and everybody would be happy, except Jeff didn't want to be a promoter. He just, I guess he and his dad hadn't talked about this particular opportunity well. So now I'm going, well, you could keep paying me, but you're really going to get pissed off because you're not going to get much money back if nobody's promoting these towns. So he said, okay, well then just take the tape out with you when you're doing your other stuff and get it on, and maybe we'll figure out a way to get you paid. And that led to contracts with WWE and WCW as our distributor, with me getting paid by them, consulting their syndication. And time passed, and USWA went out of business. And when it did, I owed a TV show to WWE on a Wednesday, and on a Monday we found out we had no shows anymore because there was no freaking company. So I had met Bert Prentice because at the very end of USWA, he was in as a house show promoter, and he and I were the only two guys allowed at the TV station to run the final TV taping. And, not only did I book it, but I had to run it. And so although we had not really gotten along, know each other, and we were, in theory, even on opposing teams at one point in USWA, Jerry said, get with Bert, he can get you a show, and by golly, he could. We ended up with a Best of Colorado Kids show, which was what America was looking for, obviously. And we went forward, and soon after that, we did our first taping, and it was a pretty good little taping, and we packed out the fairgrounds, and then for about a year and a half, had a very good, in general, run with First Music City Wrestling, and then I joined the NWA, and it became NWA Worldwide, and we discovered, among other people, Shannon Moore, Shane Helms, Christian York, Joey Matthews, the Bad Street Boys, all of whom accomplished at least a little something in their careers. And we had a mix of sort of the old Nashville, Memphis territory young boys, a few of the older guys. Dutch Mantell was part of our system. Stephen Dunn, Steve Dahl was a booker off and on at different times, as was Dutch. I was TV boy primarily, and I would come in and do the tapings and functioned as a heel. And we were running Friday and Saturday nights, and we were drawing 500 on average on Fridays and 800 plus on Saturdays, back-to-back every single week for an extended period. It's amazing to think back of that. We canceled Friday when we drew around 350 for a main event with the Tennessee Vols against Brian Christopher and Spellbinder. Wow. And that's when we went, oh, God, 350. I mean, heck, we can't make any money on that. Well, now anybody in Nashville who could draw 350, a legit gate, would be dancing on air.
Yeah, exactly.
But that was then.
Exactly.
But that was then, and this is now. And I got tired of driving over the mountain, basically, and going to Nashville, so I started running in Georgia. First is Music City Wrestling Georgia, the stupidest name ever. And then finally, around that time, I joined the NWA, and it became NWA Georgia. And weirdly, I sort of started getting a reputation. I was asked to take over a building. I had never promoted before, other than what I'd done in Nashville with Burton. He was the promoter. I suck as a promoter, but he was a really good promoter. I'm good at other things. So I'm running Loganville on Thursdays, and all of a sudden I'm running a skating ring on Sundays, and I'm doing other shows here, and I'm doing 2-3 shows a week. And next thing I know, talent wants to work for me, and WCW people are coming in on various nights out of nowhere, and it just sort of got a buzz around it. And we're in this little, terrible flea markety building on Thursdays, but all of a sudden we get a whole bunch of folk coming in, and we're starting to get known. And among those people, we heard from Steve Martin, who was working as announcer Chance Williams, and Ray Rawls, Rick Michaels, who had been running a show called NCW for a while, and not a long while, but for a while in Cornelia, and were drawing. It was the first thing that I guess that town had really had in terms of good live entertainment, quite honestly. And they were drawn, and they had sponsors, and everything was going good, I thought. And when they came in, that was the pitch. We're doing this great thing, but we really need somebody like you, Bill, because you could get us on TV, because the TV I was doing with Bert was now running in Atlanta in late night and well received. And we were all over the country, 50-some% of the country at various times during this period of time were able to see our show, an amazing quantity of people that later used to amaze our talent when they started traveling and realized people knew who the crap they were. You don't realize how the impact of television, at least back in the day, and this is now a story of back in the day, until you get on the road and people start telling you, and, you go to Chicago and somebody goes, hey, I see you on TV. You go, really? Holy crap.
Yeah, actually, X-Pac is a pretty famously known NWA Wildside fan.
Yeah, he was that one guy up at 2 a.m. in Milwaukee. We knew we had a fan. We just didn't know who it was. But we were also on in Philly. We launched the block that created ECW in Philly, and everybody else was paying except us. So we really had sort of a magical life, but that hadn't even started. They came, said start TV, and I came in, and it really was a fight at some level, because while everybody said yes to me, and I wanted to do something different. I didn't want to do NWA Georgia. I didn't think that was fair. I said, let's come up with something else. And literally, Burt Prentice came up with the name Wildside. And I liked it. I just thought it was a cool name. And so I said, let's do NWA Wildside. Well, then Steve had his panties in a wad, and everybody's healing everybody else out at different points. He doesn't want to do it, I don't want to do it. And that was the dynamic between Steve and Ray. Neither could tell the truth to the other if they had to. It was impossible for them. They both were habitual liars at some level. And so we ended up, okay, we're NCW Wildside. What the crap? Let's just get this thing going, sanctioned by the NWA. And they wanted to be on, we got going. We started doing okay. The show was, it was all right. We had a lot of their old talent, a little of my talent, and about 50% of the whole crew sucked. And, we had, fat guys and guys in T-shirts and people that could bleed more than wrestle, because Steve was a big fan of blood and violence and, hardcore and holy shit and all of that garbage. And so it took a while to start to transition. And they wanted to be on TV at a better time period. So I got them on a station called WHOT, Channel 34, at 9 a.m. on Saturday, but it required a $500 weekly fee. We hadn't paid anything before. Nashville, we always paid, by the way. And they paid the first week, they paid the second week, and then checks went out, but they bounced, and then checks didn't go out, and all of a sudden I owed a couple $1,000s to a TV station. And Steve was saying the advertisers are drying up. He's blaming, Ray Rawls, and Ray is blaming Steve. And the advertisers they had up on a big wall as if they were real had all been alienated by now, and there was no money. And I'm now out of pocket $2,000 when I wasn't supposed to go out of pocket at all on that thing. So I said, screw this. We're going to do an angle where you guys are freaking incompetent, and I'm taking over. And it's going to become NWA Wildside, and we brought Ricky and Robert and the Rock and Roll Express as heels, and we established NWA Wildside basically based on a shoot. The management of NCW was incompetent, and they couldn't handle their finances, and they couldn't agree, and each of them would rip off the other in a heartbeat. So I just took over the basic day-to-day operation of as much as I could
while Steve still generated whatever the gate was in the building and used that to pay whatever the bills were for the building and to keep it running. I did everything else, including handling the booking or getting other people to help me with the booking over time. And quite a number of people, talented people, were involved in helping and providing ideas during various times, and including our esteemed host here. So that was the beginning and what got Wildside going. And Wildside transitioned from being sort of a mixed match of what they were doing, had been doing in North Carolina for a couple of shows, and old school Georgia boys and guys that can barely lock up and people that want to just hit each other with shit. And we slowly started transitioning into the place where you learned to be good and you established what your character was and learned to tell a story. And we started skewing away from trash and using gimmick matches and blood where appropriate rather than as the driving force of the promotion. And we began skewing toward the development of talent. The impetus of that was probably the fact that we inherited one great star that was clear was going to be a great star, and that was AJ Styles, who is as much my son as anyone could be at this point in my life. And he hated me, by the way, when I first came in, of course, because I was the invading damn Yankee, even though I grew up in Miami, Florida. And but he was, in essence, the beginning. He was our genesis, quite literally, and an appropriate one for the young man. But everything flowed from that because then people wanted to keep up with that development because people were paying attention. And then Air Paris had a great feud, and then Suicidal Tendencies was created, and that established other young guys. And then we started establishing more of our junior talent, the Jimmy Raves of the world. Tony Mamaluke became part of what we were doing and was a tremendous teacher because while very young, he had unique experience coming in and was able to help our equally young crew learn to do less and get more out of it. And we had Jeremy Lopez as a long-running junior champion that gave great credibility to what we were doing. And we had Jamie Noble come in at the time, Jamie Howard, I think he was called then. And we had all of these different people, many of whom went on to accomplish some really good stuff. And that sort of became the beginning. And then it became all shapes and sizes of folks started being drawn. So it wasn't just the little guys. It was the Hot Stuff Hernandezes, the Icebergs, the Abysses as Prince Justice or Justice as we decided he should be. And Stone Mountain at the beginning was the beginning of that big guy thing. The guy sort of started breaking out, and we just never were able to get him to that final spot, unfortunately. But we sort of got that reputation rather than the one Steve liked, which is let's put somebody to a table to light somebody on fire.
Yeah, and I think it's a testament to your Charles Xavier-like mental abilities that I think you've anticipated like the next 4 questions that I had here. So you know how to save time, and you know the story is better than I do even. And just backing up to AJ a little bit, what you said the first impressions that he didn't like you. Where did that relationship turn the corner and become the mentor relationship that you have still to this day where you're representing him and obviously his biggest advocate?
Well, I honestly can't identify a specific. I do know the turning point in him first being angry, and then I think thinking about it a little bit, was I booked him in a ladder match, but I booked him in a ladder match with, why can't I think of his name right now? Tennessee guy, small. Say it again?
Was it J.C. Daz?
No. East Tennessee guy came down with, came down with, it was sort of, he was with.
Oh, Eddie Golden.
Very much so. Eddie, thank you so much. Eddie Golden, who exceptional worker, very good psychology, basic. You could call him a Southern wrestler, but the man knew how to work a hold, how to tell a story, and how to make stuff matter. And a lot of our crew didn't. The young guys in particular were being trained by the worst aspects rather than the best aspects of the ECWs of the world. They were being trained by the spots they were seeing rather than understanding there was more going on. And then the Hardy syndrome had taken over big time, which had taken backyard trampoline wrestling, if you read, the Hardy's own books, they did not know how to really lock up when they were actually getting WWE spots. They had to be taught how to wrestle. because they had taught themselves. And they were going into places like NCW, and we had Jeff come in in Nashville, and they literally were learning too. In fact, Hardy Boys were actually assigned to me in Nashville for a half a minute before they got pulled up. Literally, they were signed on a Monday, and they were drawn up to TV before we could book them the following Saturday. That's how quick it was. But regardless, that was sort of the position. When I put Eddie Golden in this ladder match, and I told Eddie, I want this thing to tell a story. I'm not worried about the spots. And there was one spot in the thing where AJ set up the ladder, Bob, put Eddie on it, went up top, did an amazing flippy thing. Eddie rolls out of the way, and he takes this ridiculously painful and dangerous bump. And it didn't really add anything. It just came out of nowhere. And I'm watching it, and I knew that he was going to do something like that. So when he came to the back, he was excited about the match. And I came up and I looked at him. He said, "What do you think?" And I said, I thought it sucked. I said, you had an opportunity to go out there and tell a hell of a story with somebody that can. You weren't out there with J.C. Daz. You weren't with a Jimmy Rave. You weren't with somebody else that's going to want to keep up with you spot to spot. You were somebody that could tell a story and isn't a big bump guy. But you were determined to be a big bump guy in that kind of match. You could have used the ladder in a much more intelligent way. You just chose not to. And I said, you're going to have to learn that you don't have to do more to get over. You have to figure out how to do less. And he looked at me like I had, called him a Satan worshiper. And that was both one of our bad times, but it really started opening the door to, after I think he thought it through. He still defends that match, by the way, but regardless, after thinking it through, he began, I think, to realize when, he began learning that, you know what, maybe he's not, a total monkey about this, and maybe he is trying to help me, and maybe he's got more influence than some of the other people I've dealt with, because all of a sudden we were hearing from, WCW, Bob Ryder and Jeremy Barash were putting us over on the radio. Terry Taylor was in development, and I had been able to stop K Crush from leaving till he finished up with AJ, which, the guys are going, okay, well, so he can call Terry Taylor. Well, that's interesting. We're not used to that. We're used to being able to call Brody Chase. So it was a different kind of thing. And I think he began to realize that I could help him. And more importantly, that I wasn't just being an ass, that I might have been abrupt, and I am, or blunt, and gosh knows, but I was actually trying to focus him toward what would get him where he needed to go. And then progressively over time, I put him into spots that became obvious as you look back at them as spots to develop him to where inevitably he ended up. At the time, he didn't know it, and maybe other people weren't paying attention, but I realized early on that I was a terrible promoter because I don't have the patience for it. I can do half-ass performing in wrestling and have done a lot of it, but it's not something I enjoy. I do it because it's easy for me, basically, to do what little I can do, whether it's a bump here or going out and cutting a promo that I don't have to think about it, where other people sometimes have to. I can just go do it. But that's fine. But it's not what I aspired to do in the business. I didn't aspire to that spot. I wanted to find a niche, and my niche became developing talent and the mentoring and trying to figure out how to, as Tommy Dreamer said to me once when he was in talent development, I help people fulfill their dreams or what they believe their dreams to be. And that sort of became what I decided was going to be my spot. And I used to tell the talent, and you've heard me tell them this, that I'm not going to be the guy that pays you, but I'm trying to be the guy that gets you paid. I want you to build up enough of a reputation with what we do with you that when you go someplace else, people want to pay you because you're a wild side guy. And that inevitably is what happened with a large percentage of the crew that came out of that building. They went various places, and some, like AJ, make hundreds of thousands of dollars now. Not everybody does, but an awful lot of people have gotten at least a little bit of a ride on the wrestling roller coaster and haven't just been an indie wonderkind that, was the hero in their own backyard for their whole career. We've been able to get people out the door, and then that's really what I enjoy doing. And it is the frustrating side that it doesn't always last. It only goes as long as it does, and you always hope that everybody gets the spot and it just keeps going and they get paid over and over and over and over and live happily ever after. But this is the entertainment business, and it doesn't work that way.
It's often feast or famine, but very interesting that you, in the early days of Wildside, in sort of this abstract way, were already doing what you're now doing professionally, essentially, which was, building, as you just explained, building a stable of talent and getting them booked. Now, out of all these guys that came through here, we got about 8 minutes left here on part one of this interview. As I stated, fans, I imagine this is probably going to be a multifaceted thing, so we'll definitely revisit with Mr. Behrens, as I know he's got a lot more to tell about NWA Wildside. But
yes, I have to go to dinner. I have to go to dinner tonight with Stephen Platinum, so the things are certainly different. So go ahead.
And the Georgia Wrestling News boards are now afloat. What I was going to ask was, AJ is the ultimate success. Look on the other side of that. Was there like one guy that you were just absolutely certain was a can't miss? This guy's going to he's going to be dominating the world, that just didn't, for whatever reason, get noticed by that next level?
Closest to being able to say that, we got really, really close to getting Stone Mountain signed. Really close. The magazines were in love with him. He was getting his picture in. Billy Apter was in love with him and had influence at the time and was doing segments on our show, in fact, as he did WOW Magazine. We did a segment, a party thing, an interview with that. WWE was because he had all, while he had limitations, he had an amazing size look thing going, but Stoney just would, come and go. And it was one of those is just when we were going. The other one, and the most obvious one, is, as you talk about coming and going, would be Jason Cross. Jason, interestingly, had been offered a WCW deal way back, in fact, literally when I was still in Loganville, as did AJ. I had consulted AJ not to take the deal because I had watched the match he had, and I knew he wasn't ready. And I knew he'd be just sucked into a system where gosh knows what would happen. Maybe I was right, maybe I was wrong, but it seemed to have turned out okay for him inevitably. Jason's dad went to the meeting and didn't like the process. He didn't like Eric Bischoff, and Chris Kanyon was in fact the guy doing all of the scouting on this. And they were just grabbing young guys all over the place. That sounds odd. Bless your heart, Chris. I didn't mean it that way. And so Jason was one of those guys that we kept putting a rocket ship up his butt, and he kept doing tremendously. And he had gotten to the spot where he was going to be booked in the Northeast. We had just put the title on him, and he didn't make an airplane. And you're going, crap. And then we had various things like that. So Jason would be an example in a minor way, and I love him to death. But Big Eddie, but Iceberg, had an opportunity. I got him at TNA, and he was so respectful of a guy he worked, Norman Smiley, that he basically screwed his spot. Because he was supposed to go out and eat Norman up. And he didn't. In fact, he did everything and sold for the big wiggle. He did some impressive stuff, but he didn't do the Iceberg stuff that we knew would get him over, and that what had gotten Jerry Jarrett to agree to book him for a 4-show run. And he had, and he was the anti-hardcore guy. They had a whole angle built around him that they were willing to go forward on. And when he didn't do what they told him to do exactly in the match with Norman, because he just didn't want to job Norman out, he was too respectful, he ended up losing his spot, and he only did 4 shows and out. And, I feel bad about those moments because, I certainly wouldn't have wanted him to make that decision. But it is what it is. And those would be the ones I would identify. And as I talk about all of them, Stoney, limited, big, had an opportunity, particularly in a WWE machine, if they protected him, and he might have made money. Jason Cross had the same kind of physical ability as AJ, just didn't have the same head. And Iceberg may well be the best big man I've ever seen work. So it's, when you see that kind of talent and you only know them potentially because of what they did primarily in Wildside, that's simply a shame.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. I know you talk about that with Iceberg, and I'm sure, he's still a dear friend to this day. I'm sure he stands by his decision there. But I remember in the early days when we were trying to build him up as the monster in Wildside and that kind of being an issue there. He's just such a nice guy. I mean, and I love him for it. But, we're trying to make you a monster, brother. You don't have to bump for the 200-pound guy, especially on the first drop kick.
But and at the same time, just Abyss had that problem too, Justice, and I used to have to literally slap him around. I mean, I remember when Hot Stuff came the first time, and he did all these cool things, do the dive over the rope, all this other stuff. He came to the back and he asked how the match was, and I told him it was terrible. And he looked at me because no one had ever told him that. He had always been told that his stuff smelled better than anybody else's. He tells that story now. He says, and his line is, and Bill is not the biggest guy on the face of the earth, So I'm sitting here looking at this guy that could crush me, and I'm just telling him the truth, which is, you can do these impressive things, but you have to remember what size you are and who you're in the ring with. And Abyss had the same thing. Abyss would bump for a chimpanzee. It was ridiculous, and you just had to go, stop it. Please make people chop your tree down, get you down, make you the big guy that you are. All these impressive things you do can still get into play, but they're more impressive if the people don't expect them from the big guy. If you go out and work as a cruiserweight as a big guy, then you're just a cruiserweight rather than a big guy. Be a big guy and then astound them with that one thing you do. The dive that Taker does over the top. You have to wait for that dive. That dive doesn't necessarily come in every match, but when it does, holy crap. There's always been the spoiler back in the day walking on the ropes. You went, holy crap, there's a big guy doing a really amazing thing. But you had to pick your spots on it, and around that, the guy was a big guy. So I think that's one of the things people, because the little guys started getting a lot of notice, they were getting more of the holy shit chants. Big guys began to go, I want a holy shit chant too. So I got to break a table. I got to dive off something. I got to, do a senton off the top. And literally that became the mentality.
Fans to love me.
Yes. So all of a sudden, big guys started to think the only way they could get over was being little.
Yeah, and it didn't work out.
But I will still maintain Iceberg in his prime, if not the best, one of the best working big men in the business.
Oh, I'd agree. And I think had, his career, just whatever happened, he got a different or better opportunity for himself and had succeeded, would have changed probably a lot about mainstream wrestling and big guys. He was such a throwback to Abdullah. He was such a badass. And, we can really go on and on. I'm going to have Iceberg on the show for sure, and have Jeff G. Bailey as well. But, Bill, we're down to a minute. I just want to thank you so much for taking your time, and we've got so much more to tell. As I knew, we barely touched the tip of the iceberg tonight, my friend.
Hey, there you go. And you even got another iceberg mention in at the end. Good job.
Oh. But, yes, we'll definitely, just as soon as you can do it, we'll set up and do a continuing series of this.
Hey, you know me, and if the fans don't, as long as you get to me before my bedtime, I'm probably good to go almost any time.
Outstanding. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Bill Behrens.
Thank you, sir.
And we're back here on the Midnight Black Mass with part 2 of the NWA Wildside Chronicles, as well as part 2 of our interview with former NWA president and NWA Wildside promoter Bill Behrens, who you can find at www.sbibookings.com. You can also follow them on Twitter at William Behrens. Last week on the program, we went back to early 1999 and even the early part of 2000 to discuss exactly how NWA Wildside came to be. We talked about the NWA versus NCW invasion, which was the inception of the NWA Elite, really, and where Jeff G. Bailey was added to the mix and went on to produce a pretty legendary stable of talent within that group. We talked a little bit about K. Crush, now known to you fans in the mainstream WWE world as R-Truth and his time in NWA Wildside, as well as Bill's initial meeting with AJ Styles and more. This week we're going to focus on the latter part of the year 2000, specifically the time where we were a development territory for World Championship Wrestling. And at this time, I would like to bring on the air our special guest, Mr. Bill Behrens. Welcome to the program.
And thank you very, very much. It's nice to have everything working.
Yeah, you never know what kind of technical issues you're going to run into in the podcast world, but we're going to keep on keeping on, and we're glad to have you.
I think it has something to do with this being part of a black mass. That's all I'm thinking.
Perhaps. I tend to have that effect on electronics of all kinds, but that's a whole other story. Part two of the interview just recapped a little bit of what we talked about last week. Now moving on into the time we were the official development territory for World Championship Wrestling. I guess right out of the gate, first of all, any thoughts on last week's topics that you didn't maybe get to after listening to the interview and into the WCW development deal? Exactly. Tell us how that came about in terms of the negotiations and whatnot.
Probably a combo package. I think I mentioned last time, and if not, it sort of all flows together. We sort of got on the radar of WCW for a number of reasons. One, and I forget the exact timetable, but it was in 2000, I convinced Ray Rawls and Steve Martin over vehement objections to book Terry Taylor and pay him more than we had ever paid any human in that building. And to this day, no one's ever been paid as much. It just happens to be the case. Well, I did it for a reason. As it turned out, we got a good match and an excellent angle out of it. He was then the Mecca of Manhood, and he was the North American champion for the NWA, and he wrestled Mike Rapada. And an angle was done with Mike's kid, Little Mike. And it was a good little segment. It looked good. But that wasn't the reason we did it. The reason we did it is that I had been working off and on with Terry for years when he was with WWE. And Terry always seemed to show up somewhere with influence. It's simply been part of his career. He's bounced around a lot, but he's always had influence, and he's always been part of my circle. But this really sort of established that. And I knew that if I got him into the building, he would see what I was aware, and that was that we were doing something special. At the same time, Air Paris and AJ Styles were involved in a feud that was gaining quite a bit of notoriety, particularly among WCW's lower tier, which were still guys making a lot of money, particularly Bob Ryder and Jeremy Barash, who had a early version of a podcast on the internet. They had WCW Live, I think it was called, and which Jeremy got paid a six-figure salary to sit in a hot tub and do. It was one of the great jobs ever in the history of wrestling. And these guys started showing up at our shows, particularly Jeremy, who would come in and throw himself on commentary periodically. And they began putting over that feud and the company in general. Prior to that, we came to the attention of Jimmy Hart when he saw the Bad Street Boys video that we had done in Nashville. Burt Prentice had actually produced that and done one of the best things he's ever done with Shane, Shan, Christian, and Joey. And everybody involved got offered something, and two out of those people were thrown with Evan Courageous and became 3 Count and started their career making money in the wrestling business. So all of this was sort of happening around the same time. In the midst of all this, Burt Prentice had a half-assed development deal for a period of time, and the perception became, for reasons unknown, that he was skimming money, and they were paying him guaranteed money, and he was supposed to pay the guys, the wrestlers, out of that money in some fashion that I never knew. I never knew the specifics of the deal, but that's what happened, and they canned Burt. Whether he had done anything wrong or not, I'll never know to this day, but the reality is that's what was going on, and this was all hovering around the middle to latter part, going into the summer, I guess, of 2000. And I got a phone call saying, would you be interested in being involved in development? We're not working with Burt anymore, and we've narrowed it down to 2 people. We've narrowed it down to you or Les Thatcher. And I went, sure, that'd be awesome. What's involved? And generalizations were presented based on what Burt's deal was. But they wanted to check out. Well, Terry had already been to my promotion, and JJ came in at one point, and while our building doesn't impress from the outside, for some reason it seems to always impress from the inside, even though it isn't overwhelming by any stretch of the imagination. It's just a little building that used to be a high school gym that's set up to do TV, and you just plug in and we do it, and we're off and running. They went up and visited Les Thatcher, particularly JJ did, and I never understood why, but JJ hated, not disliked, hated whatever Les's facility was at the time. And I don't know the specifics of why he hated it. I just know that Terry called and said, well, there is no competition anymore. JJ hated Les Thatcher's thing, so it's now you. And I went, oh, cool, okay. So I went into a meeting, and they started talking to me about how they felt burnt by the Bird experience and blah, blah. And I said, well, I'm not really good at just taking money anyway. I like to be incentivized, and I like to earn money. I've done that in my TV career, and it's sort of the way I work. So why don't what are your goals here? And they said, well, we get a lot of green guys here, a lot of young guys we're putting on TV, Jindrak and O'Hare, and it goes on. And they're just not ready, but we're sort of being forced into it because, again, this is at the tail end and things were starting to sort of unravel at WCW at some level. In fact, at this point, we're probably 6 months away from the end, but we didn't know that. But they were losing talent. They were throwing young guys out there trying to fill the gaps, and they were ready to sign more people and trying to repair for the damage that had been done when a bunch of people decided to leave. The Guerreros and so on had taken off. So I said, well, if you want to get a bunch of guys booked, why don't you pay me per person? And then secondarily, that'll incentivize, me, you guys. I hope to book a lot of guys, and I'll like that. And at one time or another, we had as many as 10 guys on a show once this started. And then the other one was it would incentivize us to open other towns and promote more regularly. And there were weeks as we got going where we promoted as many as 5 times and almost always 3 times. So we really got up and running, and we're doing 150 to 200 shows a year, or would have if this thing had lasted. I was told I had to get a specific insurance policy. I had before that been sharing an insurance policy with Bird, as it turned out, which I had bought, and then it got canceled. And the new insurance policy that I was using was in Mike Porter's name, and I couldn't use that, so I had to go get my own insurance. They said the deal is done. Let's get going. Paperwork was sent. I sent it in, and I got the insurance, paid the bill, and I received notification that they didn't want to go forward. And I went, well, crap. So I started writing emails going, okay, hey, guys, I've just gone out of pocket $1,500 and some other expenses to get ready based on a contract that's signed, and now I just get a notice from your legal department you want to cancel. What the crap's going on? And they went, oh, I don't know, but I think it's going to get straightened out. Just be patient, and if it doesn't, we'll pay you back all of your out-of-pocket, and we're sorry. And so we were in limbo, and this is, golly, I want to say it's October of 2000, and we were supposed to have guys delivered by, I think, October 23rd was supposed to be the first date, and as of now, we don't have a deal, and no money, fortunately, things got corrected, everything was fine, and all of a sudden, we got up and running in early November, literally the very beginning of November is my memory, and started getting a lot of guys in. We had a core group that we were sort of very quickly assigned that consisted of Sam Greco, Troy Endress, Bob Sapp, who materialized into becoming the most famous of them, or David Flair, who was already on television but couldn't do anything, basically. Then we had, who do we have? Danny Fakur, whose name was interesting to pronounce if you weren't careful. And then we had other people like Kevin Northcutt in for a period of time. Chris Harris was assigned to us. So we had a fairly large list of folk. In fact, when I wrote a breakdown, and I forget when this was. Let's see. In February, it was Sam Greco, Danny Fakur, the Beast, Omen, which was Troy, Scotty Patrick, who we changed to Sexy Scotty Saber, which I guess was his original name, David Flair, Kevin Northcutt, Steve Sharp, who had been Da Flava God only knows why. Chris Harris and Robbie Rage ended up being added, leading to an incredibly entertaining Robbie Rage versus AJ match at Bumpers one time that we'll go into. But we were assigned all these guys, and then in addition, we were given the TV stars, and a lot of these guys were young and as green as the guys that we were assigned that hadn't yet made TV or were just doing occasional superstars things. We ended up being assigned Johnny the Bull periodically. We had him on a lot of shows. We had Jindrak and O'Hare. We had Kaz. We had Jimmy Yang. Mike Sanders came in and worked for us quite a bit.
Jamie Noble was part of that.
Yeah, we had Jamie Noble, Evan Courageous, Shannon, and Shane came in and actually won our tag titles on a Friday and lost them on a Saturday. So they were able to, 3 Count was able to claim to have been a Wild Side Tag Team champion. The one we did the most with, really in terms of storyline and really integrating within our little happy family, was David Flair. The other guys were real easy to work with, although a couple were harder than others, and Robbie Rage was periodically just scary. But and the Beast was just entertaining. But David was the one that really meshed in the most, and the one that we had from the very beginning to the bitter end. And first time he came there, he went out, did a match, came to the back and started crying, which I remember vividly. And I went up and said, "What's wrong?" And he said, I can't do this. I'm never going to be as good as my dad. And I went, well, why is that an issue? You know, why do you have to be as good as your dad? You just need to be the best you are. And the key to doing that is to have a good time, to calm down, to not put so much pressure on yourself. And that was the beginning of what was a good relationship with him and a real growth for him. And it caused him to improve. And that improvement was then seen later in TNA when he had a brief run there. He never got to be great, but he got to be good with us. I remember when he came in one day, and I forget the reason, but I had decided he was going to take a superplex off the top. And he said he wouldn't do it. He was scared of it. And periodically I've learned that you plant the seed and you don't argue a lot. You walk away and see what happens. And and I told him 100%, I totally understood. And if he was scared to do something, then you definitely shouldn't do it. I mean, obviously a lot of other people do it and are fine, and he can talk to the wrestlers and they'll tell him that he'll be protected and he'll be fine. But if he's scared and doesn't want to do anything, I would never force him to do it. And, no problem at all. And then, I don't know, about a half hour later, he came up with a beaming smile and said, "Guess what?" And I went, "What, David?" He says, "I'm taking a superplex." And I think that it sort of underscores the environment we were in. He did talk to the other guys. They did make him comfortable, and he was on cloud 9 when he came to the back, and he had executed it. And then we put him with Romeo Bliss and made them tag champions. Romeo cut promos a little like his dad, although a somewhat different character, but with some of the same swagger. And one of the more entertaining guys we had, I thought at the time, one of the ones that started with NCW and that fit in really well once we became Wildside and changed direction. There were only 3 or 4 of those guys, honestly, that translated well to as we move forward with Wildside from the NCW time. A lot of people just dropped off the map. But Romeo, who later went on to become, I guess, Bubba on Survivor, Romeo was one of those guys that really was part of the family all the way through until he ended up sort of backing out of wrestling entirely, even though he did come back and did an appearance near the end of Wildside. But so that was really the start of the whole thing. We thought it was going to be a really big, long-running, exciting thing, and for a period of time it appeared that way. And we were running shows. Ray Rawls started running in Toccoa, so we had a regular Sunday show. We started up running on the Fridays, which is really how we got Fridays going. We had before just done first and third Saturdays, and we had not really ever run on Fridays except that I had made Hardcore Hell a 2-night thing. So that was the one time we were running Fridays preceding that, as we did a 2-nighter for Hardcore Hell historically. But otherwise, Fridays were brand new, and then Andrew Thomas would periodically run bumpers, and particularly with this talent, because with that $50 per guy, I came to a deal with all of the, quote, promoters, young Andrew, as I always called him, with Steve Martin and with Ray Rawls, and that included all shows at the arena, that they would get 40% of the money. Even though it was my deal, I could have, just hung on to the money and gone, ha, 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 look at me. But instead, I incentivized them to want to do more. So, A, they got free talent, as many as 10 people on a show, all with some, and in many cases with name recognition, and then got paid to take that talent. So it was like the Holy Grail. They only had to maybe book another 8 or 9 people and pay them, the 20 to 40 that they, would pay out, and it was hard not to make money. So everybody was having a good time, and we were doing really good, and then things started changing for WCW.
Yeah, it was not very long-lived. As you mentioned, WWE has come in now at this point, and we're hearing the rumors that WCW is going out of business, but then we find out that they've been purchased, so kind of ended that.
Well, in fact, the writing was on the wall before that. I read the first, and everything that sort of came down in February, and if you remember the history, the last Nitro was March 26th of 2001. Our last use of talent was March 21st. But we had received a note firing us, in essence, in late February. They already knew they were selling. I had been involved before that in one of the 2 efforts to buy the company. One was conducted by Eric Bischoff, and the other one was Jerry Jarrett. And I had consulted to Jerry and had run the numbers on acquiring the company. And the key for both entities was that Time Warner AOL would hang on to the TV show, because WCW always had the benefit of being guaranteed television, because it ran on what was originally the Turner and inevitably the Time Warner owned channels. So it was like the perfect deal. And again, why they could not make it profitable has to do with some of the silliness of their contracts. I mean, Tank Abbott, who was assigned to us, would be an example, a guy making $750,000 being flown first class to go to Cornelia, Georgia. So, that kind of deal made no sense, and all they ended up doing with that guy was having him look seductively at 3 count while dancing, which was good for him, but wasn't necessarily the most effective use of his potential talent. I'm reminded that other than the one punch he threw at Sabu, which actually looked good, he threw the worst punches of anybody we'd ever brought into that building. They were terrible, and legit tough guy, and he just could not throw a punch for the life of him.
A moment on him, actually, because I remember having a conversation with him. He scared me to fucking death. Here I am, just a young kid coming in there, and then here's this Ultimate Fighter, and he's all pissed off. And I'm like, hey, how's it going? And he says, man, it's bullshit. And he starts explaining that apparently in WCW's contract negotiations with him, they had hired him as a special appearance type of guy based on his UFC credentials. So apparently it was just to bring him in to do the match with Goldberg. He was supposed to get trained for the one match and then maybe come back and do a few appearances here and there. And before he knew it, they had him flying first class to Atlanta to go to Cornelia, Georgia to learn how to wrestle. And he wasn't too fucking happy about that.
No, we had a number of the guys that, and Terry would always say, shut them down. So we did. And I was the guy that had to do it. Jindrak and O'Hare came in, and we put them into a match with the Boogaloo Crew, with J.C. Daz, who's a small person, and Scotty Wren, who's a bigger person, but wasn't as tall as either of the two guys, either Jindrak nor O'Hare. And I wanted them to go under because it was important in what we were doing for our guys. And that was part of the agreement, was that we didn't just have to bring these guys in and make them into the gods of the arena. They had to be they were going to be integrated. Over and under was up to me, and they weren't all pushed to be the champions. Some became champions. Robbie Rage demolished AJ literally at Bumpers one time to become the television champion. AJ decided to demonstrate his amateur wrestling skills. And that was not a really good idea, because Robbie Rage just ate him up that night, and AJ to this day remembers the pain of that experience. But also it was good having Robbie Rage around, because if any of these guys acted up, I could just go to Robbie and go, well, would you have a talk and tell them you'll kill them? And usually that calmed them down. But we did a few attitudes, and then we had guys that would do anything. Troy Endress, big SOB that wrestled as Omen, was just a sweetheart. He'd do whatever you want. Bob Sapp was like a big kid. And always wanted to do more. I remember when he had this great idea where he was going to be, he had this idea to be like a priest character.
He was going to be the Deacon of Death. I remember that.
And he wanted to use a Bible as a weapon. Then he had this whole, it was going to be a carved out Bible with a brick in it or something. And I went, I really don't think using the Bible as a weapon is going to play real well in any theater, and more importantly, the character was like a Y, because he, as the Beast, which is how we were using him, he just had natural charisma. One of the greatest things he ever did wasn't even a match. It was a dance-off with Onyx. And it was hilariously funny, and the crowd loved it. And so he didn't have to do that much to get over, but he was always coming up with these silly ideas like the priest gimmick with the Bible and all of these other things, which made him thoroughly entertaining to deal with. Sam Greco was another one that was incredibly easy to work with, that I thought. Danny Fakur occasionally was a little more difficult, and had a tendency to get a whiny pouty going on stuff, particularly if he was going under. So it just depended on the guy. Not a lot of these guys got a lot of TV time. They did a little Superstars, and that was really about it. Abbott got a little bit of a TV spot. Sanders, who had come in for us a little bit before even WCW, he ended up getting a talking spot inevitably. But really not a lot of the guys got very far, because by the time they were getting ready, the company was going out of business. So in February, we were told they were canceling the deal. The deal was supposed to run through the 28th of March. Of course, the company closed on the 26th, which, given the fact that it was less than a month earlier that I got that notice, now looking back, clearly they had already come to the agreement with Vince to sell the assets, had identified the date they were rolling it over, and that's why we were released. Prior to that, Eric Bischoff had yanked all of the TV guys off of the shows after they had been booked. But we had those guys all the way through. Golly, we were getting guys late into February. We were still booking guys. So it's not like, because on February 23rd and 24th, we had Jimmy Yang and Kaz and Mike Sanders. And so it wasn't a long period of time, but going into March, we didn't know what was going on. We hoped that and Terry Taylor really wasn't in the loop on the company going into business that much. Everybody had rumor. So we were being told that, it was going to be reevaluated. We might be doing more. And then we got all the way to March 21st, and we had like 4 guys was all that was left. I think it was the Beast. Probably had the Beast, Omen, David Flair, and toss a coin. Sam Greco or somebody like that. Was the other one, or Danny Fakur.
Come back. I believe Greco came back. I don't think Danny Fakur came back.
Greco had one perfect storm of a bad time, because he was supposedly this kickboxer guy from Australia, and I guess they didn't know until after the fact that he wasn't, the Rob Van Dam, or not the Rob Van Dam, the Van Dam or the martial arts guy of Australia that he had claimed to be. But they brought him into Australia, and he was going to do a run-in, which they assumed would get this huge response on an Australia tour that was right near the end. And he came running down to the ring to thundering ambivalence. Nobody knew who he was. He jumped up, leaped over the top rope, his foot caught the rope, and he fell on his face. And that was his debut. And that's when we got him back.
Yeah, and he did pretty well for himself, and super guy. Like, he went on to do a lot of stunt work. He's been in several movies, and the last I checked, I tried to actually do a little research and get some verification, but it looks like he's still getting work doing that. So,
I noticed
wrestling
he did that,
to do something good.
They had decent instincts on the guys they brought in. It's just in some cases it was a little too late all the way through. By the way, in the midst of all of this, We had, a minor moment where both Air Paris, actually Easy Money also, who had every time he had come in for us prior to his tryout, had slipped on a banana peel and had a terrible match. I think the very third time, literally, he came in, he had the match in front of Terry Taylor and finally hit everything. And it was the first time ever for him.
Funny enough, he had already been headlining in ECW at that time, so I don't know. I'm sure he was great. I don't know if it was just like bad luck every time he came down to us. He just had a terrible
We had a couple
match
like that. Every time Champagne came in before that, he was always a mic guy. He was barely a wrestler, and the mic would always fry on him. It was, just some guys were had a perfect storm when they came to us. But Terry had come in. Obviously, Bob and Jeremy Barash were huge supporters of AJ and Paris. Paris, incredibly talented young man who avoided gyms like the plague. And AJ, an incredibly talented young man who worked hard on his craft, his body, and is now one of the, if not the top star in the wrestling business. And that, I guess, is the key difference between those two. But they were both signed. They got highly lucrative $300 deals. And those were signed literally in, I believe, January, February of 2011. And they went on, and I believe had a total each of 2 television matches, if I remember correctly, teamed together as Air Raid. And their outfits looked terrible. Paris's didn't fit well. But that was our little shining moment. Stone Mountain actually had a tryout just 4 or 5 months before the end, and was online to get signed also. And just unfortunately, everything ended. And an awful lot of our other people were at least on the radar. If WCW had been able to continue, you never know how many people might have went in. But again, while Air Paris didn't get another opportunity in a big league, WCW going away, he was offered a development deal very soon after that by WWE, which would have sent him up to, as it turned out, Les Thatcher, because they had by then embraced Les. Once we got embraced by WCW, WWE had embraced Les at Heartland. So, and then in early 2002, we were contacted by the Jarretts, and AJ did a tryout with David Young that Jimmy Rave was also at in Nashville. And David Young and AJ were the first 2 that were offered contracts. AJ actually signed his on a tour we did that I think was in January of that year in Australia that I went on also and helped run the backstage, because I was supposed to be one of the jobs I was supposed to have at TNA and ended up having was to be the guerrilla area guy, the go guy. And I got a highly lucrative $300 deal to do that put me into debt for quite a while. But AJ got signed, decided to go with TNA, tough decision. He had just bought a house, and that was the primary reason. He didn't want to leave home and leave Wendy with a new house and, a just recently married situation. And he thought TNA, which at the time was just going to be these Wednesday shows, pay-per-views every Wednesday, sounded like an easy gig. You drive up, you drive home, you're gone for a day. Easy peasy. And it certainly developed into a whole lot more over time. So some good came out of the bad that we had, but that was our very limited run as the WCW development area, and it sort of reinforced what I believed was my spot in wrestling, and believe my spot still is in wrestling, and that is to identify and develop talent. I'm a firm believer in the it factor. I just believe that there are people, and it may not be reflected always in their in-ring skill at the time you see them, but there's something about certain people when they come down a ramp that instantly identifies them as something special. And the crowd usually is on top of it very, very quickly. And I hope to be on top of it. And an example, because he was not a great worker, but I thought in the tapes I had seen and conversations I'd had with Orrin Hawkshurst when he ended up coming in as Altar Boy Luke, that he had that. But, in essence, he was this good-looking skinny kid with bad punching, bad kicks, and some decent high spots, and needed a lot of work. But when he came out the curtain, the crowd loved him, and the Luke chant started almost from day one. And, sometimes, my instincts aren't perfect on that, but a lot of people have had the it factor, and a lot of people with the it factor end up making some money in professional wrestling, and we ended up being blessed to be involved in it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one thing we always tout that we're proudest of are the guys that got out of what we did and went on to make some money. And you can't do that if you can't sell tickets, and the it factor does that. We're into the overrun period now of our little recording segment. Usually lasts about 15 minutes, so we'll just get in a few final thoughts, kind of backtracking a little bit. Does it speak, first of all, to the epic mismanagement of WCW that they hire us to get wrestlers ready to perform on television, and Eric Bischoff decides that he wants to pull talent from television?
Well, I think by the time Eric did that, he was already trying to buy the company, knowing that AOL Time Warner and its management had come in and went, we don't want this. Whether it's profitable or not, we don't want it. No matter how much cash flow there is, we don't want it. And there was a lot of cash flow on WCW. The biggest problem WCW had is that it had been, from the beginning, in terms of contracts, badly managed, and all you have to do is pick up a lot of books, Ole Anderson's book, any number of books. Anybody who's in the booker position there, read their book, and you'll be amazed at what these guys were told to do. Literally, Ole Anderson with Vader. I had cut a deal for, and I'm going to make a number up, and I'm probably close, but he had cut a deal for like $75,000 for Vader to come in to be a full-timer. And Vader was on cloud nine. Hey, I can stay home. I can, he was in Japan at the time. Now he can stay in the United States. All good. And he went to management. He said, I got him for $75,000. They said, oh gosh, well, that's not going to work. Then he went, well, what's wrong? So, that just isn't going to jive with other salary levels. So you need to pay him more. And that sort of underscored the problem. And then once they handed the checkbook to Eric, he, more than anyone before him, didn't care that it made no sense. He jumped on that horse and rode it until it was its back was broken, and just threw the money and started bringing in guys that had deals with creative control and were making and had sweetheart deals where if somebody else got $1 more, they got that $1 too, which was Kevin Nash's deal. And it became, really overwhelming because the product, as a result, over time began getting fragmented because no matter what they had scripted, they'd get to the tapings and everything changed because the guys involved could. And once another company came in that was brand new and looked at that aspect of it, Bobby Heenan enjoying a lovely beverage at a Road Wild, there was an element of unprofessionalism that occurred a little bit too often there that should not have been tolerated at the level it was. And over time, it built up to the point where a responsible new company with a guy, I think it was Jamie Kellner, was in there at the time who wasn't that interested in wrestling to begin with, looked at the pluses and minuses, and there were just enough minuses that the pluses didn't matter. So when Bischoff pulled guys from us, he already knew it was going under. And I already knew there was a problem, too, because I had already been doing research with Jerry Jarrett trying to buy it. We knew it was only a matter of time, and it was just a win kind of thing. I think the March end came a little quicker than we thought because Jerry didn't pull the plug on his consideration until March, and we had no idea where Bischoff was, and the internet rumors at the time had Bischoff as the guy that was going to buy it. And then all of a sudden Vince was a surprise. But it wasn't a surprise after we found out what he bought, because he didn't buy anything he didn't want. He primarily bought the library. And he bought, to the extent he wanted them, the contracts, but a number of the contracts were specifically with the corporation rather than with the corporate entity that was the wrestling, rather than WCW. So a number of the guys had pay-or-play kind of deals that just had to be played out, including most of the top talent, the Hogans and the Nashes and people like that. Their contract, even if the company was sold, had to be paid. And also in the midst of all this, there were some lawsuits that were out there with various non-talented people suing for discrimination, including the now incarcerated Hardbody Harrison. So there was a lot of nonsense going around WCW at a profound level that took away from the positive things they had done over the years, and really the surge they created, and Bischoff can be credited with, of getting the wrestling business fired up again, and more importantly, motivating WWE to dramatically change its product from a relatively cartoony form of programming that they had done off and on for years to the Attitude Era that brought them forward very aggressively, and until recently, more defined them than anything else. Recently, they took a step back to a G-rated product and have suffered as a result of it.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. You know, you talk about my favorite story, actually, from the WCW follies of management would be that, and I don't know how true this is, but I've heard this rumor, that apparently they had Lanny Poffo under contract for like 4 years and were paying him six figures and didn't even know it.
Yes. Oh, yeah, well, there was always those side deals, because that's one of the reasons Savage came, was he got a deal for his brother, and then really nothing was ever done with that. There's a lot of that kind of stuff, just silly money thrown around, guys making much. Well, no disrespect to Bob Ryder and Jeremy Brush, but they'd be the first to tell you that their six-figure salaries were something they giggled about, because they did nothing. I mean, relatively nothing for those at the time. That it was just, you know, here, have some money. Everybody gets money. And my deal was one of the really unique ones in that I was one of the guys actually having to earn the money, which was very strange. But I was also near the end, and by then they were starting to nickel and dime. Like I said, AJ and Paris were a $300 a show deal. And the WCW a few years before that would have never done that. They would have never paid just a $300 deal. That would have never flown. It was, oh my, how can we possibly do that? That's just crazy talk. So I think things had changed dramatically at that point, and it was a real shame. And it's interesting that when WCW went out of business, it was still doing a really solid number with Nitro. And looking at the numbers that are out there now, where Raw does a 3.1, 3.2, and that's a good rating. Both of the companies were doing in excess of a 5 minimum on most weeks. And immediately when WCW went away, that other 5 that ran head-to-head against Raw, that other 5 vanished. It was the impetus to create TNA and do weekly pay-per-views. The thought process is that audience has to still be out there, and we'll offer them a value of 4 pay-per-views, 2 hours each. For the same money, they'd buy 1 pay-per-view, 3 hours. So 8 hours versus 3 hours, stars they know and the up-and-coming stars, and it didn't work. But fortunately, TNA survived and hasn't quite resurrected the business, but at least somebody came in to fill that gap and survived.
Yeah, they're giving people jobs. Say what you want about TNA, but they're paying salaries, and as folk in the business, you know, we have to appreciate that. Just as we're getting to the end of this interview, I'm kind of flash forwarding to next week in part 3 of the interview as we move forward into the history of Wildside. We now know what happened at the beginning and end of the WCW era, and really represented very much the middle point, in my mind, between the changing of the guards of the NCW crew and what later became known worldwide as the Wildside crew. And so, you know, we had Air Paris and AJ leave there towards the end. They left and went off to do Nitro and whatever, and they weren't on our TV anymore. But as soon as WCW went out of business, we got them back, and that's really where they were carrying things for sure. We kind of put the whole ball in their court at that point, and they were like the spokesperson, the spokespeople, should I say, for a whole new generation of talent coming into Wildside. And what really was, to me, the year that gave us our identity, which was 2001, and I'm really looking forward to discussing that.
Very much so, and it opened what I can literally say was a floodgate of reputation. And it only had a little bit to do with the fact we'd done the development. Something about that feud and some of the other young people that were developing underneath, the Jimmy Raves of the world, something about that, because these people were starting to get out and were starting to work for the combat zones and the early Ring of Honors, and and we're getting, and even Ian Rotten's stuff was hot at the time, at least from an indie standpoint in the Midwest, and there were all these little things that were going right as we started heading into 2001 into 2002, and next thing you knew, the people from all over the United States, quite literally, wanted to come in, and a goodly number of those people, as John Laurinaitis told me, you develop small people. And I went, well, yeah, except, of course, for, Iceberg, Hot Stuff, Hernandez, Abyss, blah, blah, blah. Because our champions, almost with rare exception, were big people, and our small people champions never held the belt. AJ, as a heavyweight champion, didn't hold the title for more than 3 months. The smallest guy we ever put the title on was Adam Jacobs, but that was because Jason Crossflake. But we ended up skewing a little bit toward young talent, and that's really where our indie darling thing came in, where people really started coming in once the Matt Seidels and the Deliriouses and the Jarrell Clarks, and I can go on and on and on, and we will. But that, as we went into 2003-04, and then inevitably to the demise in 2005, that became our bread and butter. We were known as a work rate company, and but a work rate company that told a good story, and that made us unique.
Yeah, my favorite description was the mix between ECW and Smoky Mountain. I thought that was a pretty apt description in terms of we had some wild and crazy characters, but, we kept it grounded in more of the Southern wrestling storytelling aspect. But we're out of time this week, Bill. We'll talk more about 2001 next week. I do want to look at specifically like the hardcore hell of that year, which we touched on a little bit because of the WCW stuff. That would have marked the return of AJ and Paris from WCW, as well as Freedom Fight and the other major events to kind of give fans a picture of what was going on storyline-wise, and I really think that'll be a great episode.
Look forward to it, and enjoying this tremendously, and I hope the fans of Wildside, and it's a surprising number of you nice people out there, so hopefully you're enjoying this as much as we're enjoying recording it.
Yes, so we've gotten great feedback, and we greatly appreciate it. Thank you again, Mr. Bill Behrens. Episode number 2 of NWA Wildside Chronicles is in the can. I'll talk to you next week, good sir.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, fans.
But I've enjoyed where we are to date, and I guess we sort of left off with the demise of WCW and the short run Wildside had in transition at that time. And one of the things I think we expressed, but it sort of sets the plate for where Wildside went and what it eventually became. What brought us to the WCW party was Air Paris versus AJ Styles. Two young stars that captured interest from a major company. What didn't bring us to their attention was a lot of the stuff that Wildside or NCW or even my NWA Georgia had done before. We had a tendency to use the same basic old school guys that had been around the block and had been there for a long time, and that was the bread and butter of what we did. And somewhere just going into the WCW thing, when we started focusing on a couple of younger guys that could go and clearly had something special, then all of a sudden the focus became, wow, there's something really cool going on there. And we had a lot of other good stuff, but what was shining was really what was new, what was different, what was young. And that sort of really set the stage once WCW went away and we lost the diversity of folk that they had brought in. It wasn't that we were starved for talent, but all of a sudden we had a little bit more of a reputation that was growing on a national level as being a place where you could be discovered.
Yes, and it continued, and as you mentioned, Paris and Styles, they set the bar, raised it, and then set it again, but then the next generation that came in following that, really in my mind, Hardcore Hell 2001 was the turning point there, where that was the last inkling of any WCW relationship we had from a couple of guys maybe that had come back to do some final spots, so like David Flair.
David Flair was one of the few that hung around after it was all over for a while because he just liked being there.
and that's where Justice had made a transition. A lot of these guys, of course, you talked about the small guys, but later becoming Abyss, one of the biggest guys, and actually that's where he won the NWA Wildside Heavyweight title, ending Stone Mountain's over a year-long reign.
But we had positioned him sort of coming in like he had been positioned in Nashville. He was sort of a beneficiary of what had been done by Bert Prentice over there, although we had to change him from the guy in the Teletubby outfit to something different. He was Prince Justice when he first came in. The goddess Athena first presented him, and then we changed that. And we moved away from that, and he became simply Justice. I made him change his gear, lose a little weight, in fact, and put him with Jeff G. Bailey. And it was all the difference in the world. And we began to teach our larger guys to work slower, and at the same time began focusing on smaller guys. But what hadn't happened yet was the floodgate that happened soon after, where a diversity of people started coming in from all over the place. But we still had a good core of smaller guys that could go. We had Adam Jacobs, we had Jimmy Rave, we had AJ still coming back, we had JC Daz still, we had Jason Cross, and we had just put together the Lost Boys, and we had TNT, Tony and Todd. So our quantity of smaller guys had increased going through 2001, and our focus began to change as a result of that. We also then added Jeremy Lopez and Tony Mamaluke. Mamaluke being one of the great additions, because single-handedly he helped ground a lot of the kids that liked to fly and taught them how to work, and became one of the more influential people in our development. I mean, looking back, we were doing some really terrible shows at the Globe Theater, in 2001, and the first time we did anything that focused on juniors was there. We did actually a night of the Super Juniors. It's the first time we did one. And the idea was whoever won that thing would face Jeremy Lopez for the title, and we started shining a brighter light on a junior title. In fact, I don't really think we had a junior title before that. I think we created it. But and the end result was Todd Sexton won that, he reminded me today.
Yes, he did. He did win it once. The feud of that year over the junior title was focusing on two guys who really broke out in 2001, and both went on and are still doing great things in wrestling, and that was Jimmy Rave and Caprice Coleman. Both of those guys had been around a little bit before then, but it was really when they found each other that I think the best came out of them.
Oh, I agree. And also the other thing that joined our little happy family in 2001 was the original Gangsta New Jack.
Yes.
Who you remember fond stories about. My favorite New Jack story, and it had to do with the Globe Theater, is you will remember that we had booked Tommy Rich to face New Jack at one of the Globe shows. We then did a really nice thing at Clark College where Jack had gone during their homecoming. Huge crowd of Clark University people. We were able to present him with an award in front of this crowd. It got a great response. We offered the crowd the opportunity to come to this show at a dramatically discounted rate, and nobody showed up. And including Tommy Rich, as it turned out. It was actually one of Iceberg's first big spots because he got to work Jack. But I remember when we did the promo for that, we showed up at a field looking over at the city of Atlanta, and Jack was doing a promo about Tommy Rich having been something back in the day, back when gas was 29 cents a gallon, if I remember the shtick. But before we get into that, we had a minor problem because you had forgotten to charge the battery on the camera. And you walked up to me going into that, and he went, "I'm about to get killed. The camera's not working. The battery's not working. Jack is here. And what are we going to do? We can't tape this thing." And fortunately, I had a voltage gimmick in my car, and we were able to plug in and get the thing done, and I saved your life.
I would have hated to have ended there on the side of the downtown Atlanta streets at the heads of New Jack and never to be heard from again. The Reverend would have never even existed.
That's right. But it went on, and Jack became part of our happy family. Sort of the yin to the yang is, and as we started focusing on really good heavyweights. You mentioned Justice, and then eventually Hot Stuff Hernandez coming in, and numerous other folk that we were able to focus on. Some returning. Scotty Wren came in and out at times and was there when he was and not there when he wasn't. And you know, of course, the big stars like Henry Haas. But we also started bringing people up from underneath. Part of the Friday thing that ended up happening, because we hadn't really run Fridays until WCW, was it became a development area for us. And we started developing people that came to the forefront during the 2001 into 2002. Among them was Slim J, who literally made one of his first big show appearances at Hardcore Hell in 2002.
Yes.
In a six-man with another young guy named Jeremy V.
Absolutely. A lot of great young crew. Those guys were really on the underneath in 2001. Kind of still being developed on the Friday side of things, and they came up later. But there was the roster was so thick with talent. I'm just looking at some of the great feuds we talked about, the Jimmy Raven, Caprice Coleman. We'll revisit that a moment and talk about the ladder match at Freedom Fight in the summertime. We moved from Hardcore Hell on to Freedom Fight. We just captured lightning in a bottle there somehow in the deal with Blackout coming up at the same time and gaining their popularity, and we put together.
Well, and we had G-Rated underneath. The Lost Boys were established, and the ladder match was, in fact, the main event of Hardcore Hell 2002 with Blackout and the Lost Boys, which was the first tag team ladder match we had done. And we had done a really good, or at least well-received at the time, ladder match with Daz, Jimmy, AJ, and Jason. Before that was looked at the time as like, holy crap, although now all of the guys look back and go, wow, Jason Cross didn't sell anything. But regardless, it was a good match at the time, and it sort of started establishing. But I mean, when we finally got to 2002 Hardcore Hell, we were doing the combo package that finally became the definition of Wildside. It was becoming the three-ring circus rather than what had got us to the party before. Steve Martin in particular was a big fan of blood and gimmick. And, you know, for him, a good idea was to create a character named Heroin. I mean, that would be a great idea. And we instead sort of changed things. And you get to Hardcore Hell and you look at the Day 2 card. Day 1 card was headlined by Blackout and the Lost Boys, which was a hell of a match. But then Day 2, we had a Cage of Horrors match with Tank and Iceberg. We had The Blood. We had a three-way dance for the Wildside title with Rick Michaels, David Young, and AJ Styles. We had a world title a TV title match with Onyx and Crew Jones. We had Caprice Coleman and Jason Cross in a match. We had Jimmy Raven and Tony Mamaluke in an I Quit match. Todd Sexton going after the junior title with Lopez. And then we had one of the more popular characters, Laz, now as Dustin Timberlake, with Adam in an angle we had set up, which was thoroughly entertaining because, much like Onyx, Laz really freaked them out. So we just had all that stuff going on, and Omega Rumble. But we had gotten to the point where we really were presenting a diversified card. We really were giving the audience that was coming something special all the time. You got a little of everything if you came to a Wildside card, and it became the definition of what we did top to bottom from thereafter. And I think literally the end of 2001 into the beginning of 2002 reformed what Wildside was. WCW didn't do that, but it did because of all the influx of people and what we ended up doing during that time. It set the plate for the decisions that were made after and how we booked the promotion and how we diversified what we were doing. We decided there was a spot for everybody. And interestingly, where there wasn't a spot was for the aging veteran.
And that actually leads to my next question, or question observation, really, however you want to look at it, that some of the stars who had previously been headlining cards would see their last time as regulars in a Wildside ring in 2001. Total Destruction being one of those. Rick Michaels and David
Total
Young
Destruction,
as a tag
Eddie
team.
Jesse Taylor, and I'm not, no disrespect to any of these people. They were all talented. Scotty Wren went away. Terry Knight was in and out during that period of time. there was an awful lot of guys that brought us to the original party that were part of what was the NCW crew, and then there was a group of people, many of whom never survived, the Silky Boom Booms of the world that came in from NWA Georgia that were there for the very beginning. And there was a really odd mix of talent that started in 99 and into 2000, and we really didn't find the direction I wanted until 2001. And as a result, a lot of these guys who were making long drives from Tennessee in many cases saw that their future really wasn't in it because they were more part of a different system. And they hadn't made it. They were there at the WCW time and didn't get hired.
And there comes a rough time in every guy's life in the business, myself included, where you have to come to grips with that, and you don't hold the business any negative will, but, you might want to try to move on to something else. I've enjoyed being able to stick around, but I know other guys don't necessarily feel that way. And that's just the way it goes. But then you did mention one guy that I want to take some time to discuss, because probably the most infamous incident of 2001 stemmed from the angle-wise we brought in James Mitchell to create the Lost Boys, but also was managing Rick Michaels and Scotty Wren at the time. And
yeah,
David
the only reason
Young
he was doing that
Knight.
is that Rick Michaels was determined that he needed to be the focus of that spot when it was intended to get the Lost Boys over, which is unfortunately just the case of that particular spot. But regardless, the Lost Boys were the ones that got over, so that was the key.
They were, and they did. But and then David Young and Terry Knight were teaming as the new Bad Attitude in the feud, and it resulted in Steve Martin's favorite, as you like to say, the Infernal Damnation Flaming Tables match, and which anybody that was around at that time knows was one of the more grumpy arguments I ever had. And I had 4 guys in a room, 3 of whom were planning to wear T-shirts for the match, and one guy that wasn't, Terry Knight. And David had agreed to take the spot, go through the flaming table. Terry agreed to take the spot, ended up with Terry doing it, but he wouldn't put a shirt on. I had vetoed the spot over and over, and Steve demanded, and at the time, we were a partnership. Steve demanded it had to happen, by God, it was one of those moments. And I finally gave in on it, and, well, you can tell the rest of the story. Well, there was an issue, typically, and not to expose the business, so to speak, but since this isn't much of a wrestling-themed podcast as it is a pop culture and entertainment podcast, in the fire stunt, when you're going to set someone ablaze, typically you want to use lighter fluid. And even then, fire is very dangerous to use as a stunt because it cannot be trusted and it cannot be controlled. It's going to do what it wants to do no matter what. So when you use the lighter fluid, at least the body mass, whatever clothing you're wearing, will tend to snuff it out. It's not very strong. It's not very powerful. It usually won't stay lit for a long time. In this case, somebody, and I'm not sure where this came from, but somebody thought the better idea was to use rubbing alcohol.
That would be Steve.
As the inflammatory device, and, well, it turned out very badly. Terry Knight hit the table, caught on fire, stood up, was still on fire, ran around the ring like a Looney Tunes cartoon until one of the Cole brothers came out and tackled him. And at that point, I think Rodeo put him out with a fire extinguisher, if memory serves me correctly.
Exactly so. And part of the problem was that if anybody is, and a lot of these tables don't even exist anymore because they've gone to the fiber kind of table, the poly fiber kind of things that you can't even break well anymore. The old school tables are harder to find that were made out of pressed wood, but they were laminated and painted on the top, and there was a shellac cover. And what happened with the high heat of alcohol, the rubbing alcohol, is that it melted the paint and the lacquer on the top of the table. So when you talked about poor Terry Knight, bursting into flame, what eventually became known as the TK Broiler, it stuck to him because it had become a gluey mass. It had become a melted part of it. And when he hit it, it stuck to him. So not only was he on fire, but it was no way to get the fire off of him without totally extinguishing it. He could run around, he could roll, and it was going to stay there forever. That did two things. One, it convinced me that I needed to gain even more control over a promotion I've been trying to gain control over for a period of time. It convinced me or began to convince me I had to find a way to get rid of Steve. And it also convinced me to shut him down as much as humanly possible on anything that resembled an idea. I also got offended by the fact that, unfortunately, while Steve had professed that if anything bad happened, he would take care of people, when it came down to helping Terry with his hospital bills for second-degree burns, literally, Steve was nowhere to be found. I ended up helping Terry at that point, and it also established something that, has to be the key for any kind of promoter, which is, if you ask somebody to take a risk, you need to take some responsibility for it. And I was offended at the time that Steve didn't take responsibility when I had fought the spot. Terry remained loyal thereafter and returned and, had various roles, including one as an Italian at one point, and was productive for the company. But that was one of the worst moments of a number of bad moments, but one of the very few, I'm pleased to say, where we asked somebody to do something that stupid. And I can beam with pride. I wasn't the one that asked them, but it doesn't matter. I was still the one responsible inevitably.
Usually guys will that are willing to do stuff that stupid, at least they came up with it, and I know Terry didn't come up with it at that time. So
no, he volunteered, though, bless his heart, and I regret that he did. The backup was David Young with a T-shirt on, and at least he would have had a shirt to take off and throw away. But either way, it was something bad getting worse.
Yeah, rough spot, but we moved on, and the hardcore was limited. But speaking of guys that did the quote-unquote hardcore style and did it well without using a lot of unnecessary stuff, is the man who debuted in 2001, who had a great career in the arena, who was many times a handful for you, I know, but I think overall you had a good relationship with him. That was the Strong Style Psycho Tank.
Tank came in, Warren. The only way I ever calm Tank down when he gets out of control is I come up to him and call him Warren, and he becomes a puppy dog. Tank is just very strong in what he does, but one of the truly exceptionally talented guys. When he first came in, interestingly, he was first put with White Trash as Project Mayhem, as a tag team, sort of a pseudo-hardcore Strong Style kind of tag team, with Tank covering for some of Trash's weaknesses, but Trash at the time having the greater charisma. As Trash recently told me at a show we were at, I'm the one that actually encouraged him to do the Trash Salt, which I didn't remember, but nice to know. But Trash would do these things. You'd look at him and not think he could do anything, and then he'd do the freaking Trash Salt, and it was cool. Tank came in at that point. Eventually, of course, he made his greatest impact interacting at various times with Iceberg. Iceberg, interestingly, came in at the first time as a guy going under as Iceberg Slim to White Trash. So there's a link between all of these guys inevitably. White Trash is the link to them all, the degree of separation of all these guys.
And it's funny that you mentioned that, because really the link from Tank goes then to Iceberg, who also debuted in 2001. I know we talked a little bit about Berg in the first episode, but it was a very unique circumstance, because you did mention he had that initial match with White Trash, and that was, I believe that was actually in late 2000. I don't even think we'd hit 2001 when that happened. And
it didn't lead to anything. Which was a shame, but Berg did what he, bless his heart. We talked about this in another segment. Berg did exactly what he was told and made White Trash look like $1 million. And here was a guy, 450 pounds, that had gone toe to toe with Mr. Pogo in Japan, and we had him selling for trash. That's what we did.
But then fast forward to October, we're gearing up for Fright Night, which is where the aforementioned four-way ladder match you talked about happened. But then also it was headlined by the Four Corners of Pain, which was Blackout against Tank and White Trash. But like 2 shows prior to that, we had NWA World Champion Steve Corino advertised, and our champion was Scotty Wren at the time, and he was going to face him, and for whatever reason,
and we had Kristen and Joey advertised also, and Kristen and Joey called and said they had a booking in Maryland. Did they mind if they made more money? And I said no. Corino no-showed because at the time he was working for Dusty. And this was at a time that Dusty had gotten grumpy at me because I had told him why Smoky Mountain had gone out of business and what not to do. And then he had done all the things I told him not to do, and I ended up being right, which meant he lost a lot of money. So he's pissed at me because I was right. And eventually, of course, we kissed and made up, and Dusty ended up making some legendary appearances in the arena that he did for free as a result of it. So everything comes around to benefit in the long run, and those 2 spots are, tremendously memorable. But that was the reason behind Corino coming. Interestingly, though, we announced Corino wouldn't be there, and nobody cared.
I don't think we announced him until the day of on the internet, or if we even did that, we might have just announced it at the building. I know it didn't affect box office. We had a shitty draw whether or not he was going to be there, so it was probably.
Yes, I was just thankful. I was thankful 3 guys I had to pay weren't on that payroll. That's all I looked at the time. I learned that a long time ago. Jerry Jordan taught me that no wrestler is necessary to a card. Everybody is replaceable. And it was the greatest lesson I've ever learned, because if somebody isn't there, no matter how integral they are to the spot you're doing, it doesn't really matter. I mean, there'll still be wrestling, the show will get done, and something will happen. It's not that big a deal. By the way, the other thing that happened in 2002 that was sort of nice is we started getting Dory Funk and some of his people in.
Yes. Dory and Dusty both appeared in 2002, and I really want to talk about those.
And you know who else came in 2002? We got those Briscoe brothers in.
Yes.
And we got the Backseat Boys. And all of a sudden, that became sort of where we were going. Literally, those were our starting point. We did a tag team gimmick at Fright Night. And we got the Briscoes in. And we got the Backseat Boys in, and all of a sudden we were becoming more indie darlings at some level, and it led to an awful lot more that followed that. In fact, we did the second Mark versus Jay Briscoe match at Freedom Fight that year.
That's actually what I want to focus on next week is the visiting talent. So, really, come up with your good Briscoes and Trent Acid stories and SATs and all those guys that came in that summer of 2002, because we're gonna talk a lot about that.
They threw little red in the trunk and everything when the SATs come.
That's right. They did, but a lot of entertaining anecdotes there. But of course, now back to the Steve Corino thing. Him no-showing is what spawned Iceberg. We needed an opponent for Scotty Wren. We scoured all of the guys we could find who could fill that spot to be a monster for Jeff G. Bailey, and then the light bulb went off, and I think you and me at the same time looked at each other and were like, Iceberg Slim.
Yes, and we gave Iceberg an interesting gimmick in that he had the implement of mass destruction that he was given right around the same time, which was a bottle opener. Which amazingly became really a scary thing, which I thought was awesome, is we took something innocuous and it became, as deadly as a knife.
Yeah, the promos with Bailey narrating a bloody iceberg, and Berg is telling the story with his eyes.
Remember the one we used on the opening where Berg had all the tacks in his head?
Yes. There was just something artistic about those that I think we didn't even realize we were doing at the time.
No, Eddie was often brilliant, and when he wasn't, it wasn't because he didn't have the talent, it's because he just wasn't deciding to do that particular day.
Yeah, and went on to be probably the greatest monster we ever had. And a long line of good big talent.
I definitely could not disagree with that. I think Iceberg's match-to-match history with rare exception, and most of those are where I came out to the ring and yelled at him. With rare exception, Iceberg's match history within Wildside will hold up with anyone, literally anyone. I don't care who it is, even AJ's match history in Wildside. Iceberg's will hold up as consistently at the highest level of quality, the highest level of work rate, and the highest level of storytelling. And the last one's the most important to me. And Berg always told a good story and was always extremely believable in anything he did. And the only times he betrayed himself is when he abandoned that for whatever reason. But in general, he was, I can't think of anybody that or very few people that accomplished as much as he did and did it as well as he did.
And he was feared, legitimately feared. And our audience.
And yet he was the lightest guy on the face of the earth. I remember, God, I'm going to forget who the crap it was. Somebody who eventually was in WWF Development. In fact, when I was there, and I can't remember the guy's name, but a guy came in that just pissed off Iceberg, and he went out and he beat the crap out of him. And when the guy came to the back, he said, "Thank you." And Berg was like, "Crap, I did everything I could think of." Like when he launched himself on Goth when he was being taken out, and it was just tremendously entertaining. But every time Berg did a spot with me, I got splashed, and it was like a big, warm, fluffy pillow hitting. It was just great. He was light as a feather when he wanted to be, and even when he wanted to be a mean, tough guy, he would only go so far. I mean, the biggest ass-kicking I ever saw Berg or Tank give was, bless their hearts, with Pomp and Circumstance.
Yeah, and those were guys they liked.
Yeah, they were actually trying to get them into the company, so they took them out there and beat the crap out of them to the point where I had to come to the ring and tell them to leave. And, of course, Sean Tempers is now both the Anarchy champion and the North American champion, and Ace Rockwell did pretty well himself. So they were right. But their way of showing their love was a bit odd at the time.
Yeah. Just one of those things, I guess. Really, we're now to the little overrun period of the interview, so the last thing I think we can address for 2001, if you want, is that's really also the last time we saw with any regularity in Wildside Air Paris, who was a big part of launching off the new generation of talent.
Yeah, he actually sort of vanished well before the end. It was almost in the middle that and once the WCW thing went away and a brief run after that, he sort of lost his smile and faded away into oblivion. Frankie was never a gym-ready, hard-working guy, and I don't want to diminish his considerable in-ring skills because in terms of basic psychology and the ability to execute moves, he's as good as there ever was. God only knows what would have happened if he had the work rate mentality AJ had and where he might have been. Because even a couple of years ago, when Frankie was working matches carrying a little more weight around the gut at a much older age, he still knew how to do less and get more out of it. And he was a young guy that did that early. Part of that came, I think, by getting a lot of training with David Young and sort of being a young boy to David Young at one point. And, in fact, it was David Young who brought him to me initially in Loganville. And I remember my favorite Frankie story is David brought him in, and I looked at him, and, he's skinny, decent-looking kid, but it's not like you would say he was, Hollywood handsome or anything, but decent-looking kid. He had no body at all. There was no muscular definition on him. But his work was good, and at the time he had acne, really bad acne, and I went, and David's putting him over, give him a chance, please, and I'm going, what's going on with the acne here? And David goes, he's taking steroids, but he thinks he can just sit on the couch and that'll help. So all he does is get acne from it. And I went, and by the way, that in a nutshell is Frank. It was, he is that guy that would watch the commercial where, you put the thing around your waist and it shocks you into abs. He would believe that could work. And all you do is you take the steroids and you get muscle. That's what happens. Well, no, in his case, he sweated it out of his pores and got acne. But that was Frankie, and just in terms of how he did it. But when it came down to hard work in matches, he worked as hard as anybody I've ever seen, and he delivered some of the best matches I've ever seen. And his stage was over the top good. And his stuff and what we did with Suicidal Tendencies with him, John Phoenix, Adam, and Jason Cross in various incarnations of that group had a legacy that when we brought it back in 2005, 3 years after they had ever seen that group, people still remembered.
Yeah, and Suicidal Tendencies really ruled 2001. I mean, it was really their year to shine. That was where they did the big turn with Phoenix and Jacobs, and that's where AJ and Paris teamed up really until Paris left. And then I guess
Adam Jacobs actually started out as a tag team partner with Silky Boom Boom, and I remember Adam looking at Silky, who went out with this, pimp top hat and this, and this cape as if he was a little chubby, white pimp. And Adam looked at me and went, all I got's the little tights. I got nothing here. I got nothing. And we actually used that inevitably as the go-to, and the screw was on Silky, inevitably, who eventually got faded out. And that led to him being part of Suicidal Tendencies. And the end result with Suicidal Tendencies was our first cool thing, where they were heels at various times, and the crowd still loved them. They established the cool heel. We're better than they were baby faces initially, and then they became cool heels, and they came out with the Eminem music, and it just worked. It was one of those, lightning in a bottle kind of things, and all the guys that were in it really, really got accentuated by it, and it was a good thing for everybody involved. But Frankie Air Paris was the leader. He was definitely the leader of that group and the motivating force of it, and everybody benefited by that. And when he left, they were able to continue without him, and they still had great heat. They still had something going on.
Yeah, they continued. I mean, some of the best matches we ever had involved the combination of gentlemen. There were many different opponents, but definitely involved that combination of guys. Now, just final thing about 2001, because we capped off the end of the year with AJ Styles winning his first ever NWA Wildside Heavyweight Championship, and a great teacher versus student angle that we did with he and Rick Michaels, where he ended up finally besting him for the title at Christmas Chaos 2001.
Yeah, they went out in the crowd when I told them not to, and then my poetic justice was Ray ended up taking a bump on one of the gimmick tables that didn't have any leverage on it because he deliberately wanted to bump on my gimmicks just because he was being a butthole. And of course, he hit the table, and the table didn't sell at all for him. And it was just an awesome moment because I'm standing there watching him about to do it, and he's got this grin on his face because they had gone to the concession area, they had run all around. And I tried to keep the guys out of the crowd, just because folk get hurt or Jeff T. Bailey's going to, punch somebody. So, or young Andrew at times. So you had to avoid these moments, and they did it deliberately. But, yeah, that was a culmination. But interestingly, AJ only, as one of the biggest stars we ever developed, I don't think he had the belt more than 3 months.
And I think that was the only time he had it. He and David Young may have traded it back and forth maybe once. And if that's the case, then that complete
Well, they
run
were in the middle of a feud going into 2002 that led inevitably to them being hired by TNA, because the match we did, which was I want to say a 15-minute Broadway with a 5-minute overrun that ended up in a Broadway also, where the match itself was underwhelming, but the 5-minute overrun was over the top, including stuff that dives off of the announce position and all of this other crazy garbage. Ended up being the match they took to Nashville in early 2002.
And that's the job that got him hired, or the match that got him hired.
Yes. Yeah, so you're right. That feud was early in AJ's title run as he went back and forth with David.
And then that was it. And that's just, as you mentioned, that is really interesting that he was the only, one of the only guys as far as a big star like that to come out that had held the belt for just a song. But, as we got the reputation for being a small guy company, that title was usually around the waist of larger fellas. Yeah,
very much so. We put the belt on Jason Cross, a smaller person, and he, did a Jason Cross. We put it on Adam Jacobs for a brief period of time and AJ, and those are the three smaller guys. Everybody else was a big person. In general, our heavyweight title was on a heavyweight, and even the best of our lighter weight guys didn't have it for long, although obviously AJ's decision not to be a long-running champion was tied a little bit, if not a lot, to him becoming an NWA World Heavyweight Champion in early 2002 with Total Nonstop Action Wrestling. So it was, being the Wildside champion probably needed to take a back seat to that. And inevitably that had AJ come back, and although he had just lost the title, and this was a few years later, but he ended up coming in and had an excellent match with a young star then and a older star at that point of Rain Man, and ended up Rain Man defeating AJ. So AJ also learned to give back.
And he did many times, and we'll definitely get into that down the road. But we're running out of time. 2001 was a great year. It was really the year that I sunk my teeth into Wildside and really became involved on many levels, and just some of the greatest times of my life.
And by the way, it has been announced before, and folk do know, but yes, you did create the phenomenal AJ Styles.
Yes, I did. Thank you. Give me my credit. No, I'm kidding. AJ acknowledged me publicly.
And by the way,
Twitter,
AJ acknowledges that anytime he's asked, because you are the one that announced him that way.
I greatly appreciate him still remembering little old Dan here, and hopefully we'll have him on the program at some time.
Yeah, that one and Spine Splitter are my two favorites, by the way.
As they are of many folks. But, Bill, another edition has come and gone. Next week, 2002, we're going to look at the year NWA Wildside became Indie-tastic. And I mean that in the best way possible, where we see a humongous influx of great talent from all over the independent wrestling world grace our building in Cornelia, Georgia.
And I'll look forward to that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, as always, for taking your time, Bill. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bill Behrens here for Part 3 of the NWA Wildside Chronicles.
We'll keep doing it until we're done.
That's right. We might have a few left, but we'll keep doing it. Have a good one, Bill.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Okay, and there you have it. Volume 3 down of the NWA Wildside Chronicles, and he's just the first guest. That's the third episode of the first guest. So this is going to be a long-running project. We hope you have your thinking caps on, Wildside fans, because we're going down memory lane, and we ain't stopping until we're done. As he says,